Hello everybody, my name's Colin D. Ellis and welcome to the Culture and Coffee podcast, where I discuss a news story or a topic of workplace culture and some practical things that you can do over the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. So let's get into today's episode. Hello everybody, it's Colin here. Welcome to another Culture and Coffee podcast for Monday the 11th of December 2023. And as my daughter reminded me, it's 2 weeks to Christmas. And even though she's 16 shortly after Christmas, she still gets excited by it, even though we lied to her for years about the existence of a big fella in the North Pole. But that's all right, we've kind of made a peace with that now. This week I've been in Berlin, a mixture of business and pleasure, and it was freezing, absolutely freezing. It's times like this when I'm back in Europe, especially in Northern Europe, at this time of the year, I realised how acclimatised I'd become living in the Southern Hemisphere. It was -1, and honestly, it felt like about -20. Then it got colder, it was -6, and that felt like it was about -50. And then it snowed, and of course it was very, very pretty, but I was absolutely frozen. Couldn't feel my fingers, couldn't feel my toes. And it reminded me when I was a kid and snow used to fall, and there was always this hush that fell over the neighbourhood. That's what I remember. No cars would be on the road, and you would just go out snowballing and then come back like 5 hours later. Like your parents had no idea where you were, and they didn't care either. They were just like, at some stage they should come back. And it did remind me of that, even as a fella in my early 50s. I get those good memories. Anyway, the other thing that it reminded me of, and mainly because I've seen lots of people out and about while I've been here in Berlin, and obviously talking to clients about this as well, is the old end of year celebrations. Now, for those in I guess sort of more Christian countries, there's a kind of break for Christmas. Now, I don't want to specifically focus on Christmas per se, because I recognize that it's not everybody's religion, even though that was something that I grew up with. It's not everyone's religion, and not everyone has the luxury to break for the end of the year. But I want to talk about celebration more generally. But I also want to acknowledge I'm here in Northern Europe, when traditionally, and it's the same in Australia as well, whereas traditionally people will stop to, I hesitate to use the word celebrate Christmas, because I think it's losing its meaning for many people. But they what they do is they stop because they've got the end of the year, and there's some form of celebration, some form of party. So that's what I'm going to talk about on the podcast today. I'm going to talk about how to celebrate respectfully, because not everybody does. Like in an ideal world, everybody would celebrate respectfully, but they don't. And there are many stories in the media all of the time about, times when that hasn't happened. In fact, as a manager myself, I had to issue someone with a formal warning, which I'll get to as we go through the podcast when I talk a little bit about this. But almost every team at some stage needs to celebrate success, and they need to. It is a need. It's definitely a need. And often when I start working with teams, and I ask the question, what are you good at? What are you not good at? All very consistently, one of the things that teams aren't good at is celebrating success. And, I always refer, Danny and I, my business partner, recently started working with sports teams. If you haven't downloaded the white paper, by the way, you can get that from www.theteamcode.com. And there was a great piece of research done by a guy called Dr. Gert van Pepping. He was a sports scientist at the University of Groningen. And what he was able to demonstrate through his research is the more convincingly someone celebrates success with the teammates, the greater the chances are that the team will win, and win in whatever winning means in your context. And remember, I've talked about this before, but it's worth reiterating. everybody in every business wants to win, but winning at all costs is really, really bad, and that's what we want to avoid. So winning in and of itself is not a bad thing. And what we need is people with discipline. We need people with drive. We need, kind of people who understand how to collaborate to really, set in motion the conditions where each team can win. But that's got to be done in a very humanistic way. It's got to be done in a way where there's no stress, there's no anxiety, everyone's in it together, there's no bullying. And I've talked in the past about high performance. There's still this connotation with high performance. In fact, I think I talked about it on the last podcast about the culture crisis in sport, is that high performance is shouting and screaming and bullying and anxiety, and it's not. You can get some high performance in that space if that's what, if that's the route that you take. You shouldn't, but if that's the route that you take, but it won't be sustained. And at some stage, the culture will, guaranteed, it will turn toxic if you stay there for too long. Our high performance, consistent high performance, consistent winning, and when Danny and I talk about sports cultures, we very much talk about winning cultures or vibrant cultures, we call them in the corporate space. It's about making sure that you understand the behaviors required, make sure you understand the goals, and then making sure that everyone understands that in order to achieve those things, you have to be the best version of themselves. And that's where you get consistency, when everybody understands what good teamwork looks like. Now, I'm a big believer, and always have been a big believer is that if you're going to hold any kind of end of year celebration, it's not something you do because it's driven by the date. And I think lots of people do that. Lots of people are like, oh, it's the end of the year, or it's Christmas, or it's December the 1st. We should celebrate. We should have a Christmas party. Who's organising the Christmas party? It's very much a kind of Christian thing, that the Christmas party, but who's doing that? And it becomes a default. We're really, kind of any end of year celebration really, it is done because you've achieved something. It's not just done by default. I believe that celebrations are earned, and high performing teams will say this. They'll say when we achieve a target, or else when we are living the values that we have in plain sight, that's cause for celebration. Missing targets, missing deadlines, having a really poor culture is not a reason for celebration. And yet people still do it. They feel like, a party in December is like a magic wand. And we should do this, or we have to do this. No, you don't. You really don't. And celebrations should be earned. That said, if you don't achieve what you set out to achieve, you can still bring people together and pause for reflection. Talk about the learning that you have. Talk about the things that you're going to do differently next time. You don't want to celebrate this. Many organizations, and unfortunately it will happen again this year. It really will happen this year. Many organizations they'll stop, they'll celebrate, and then the media will point out they've got absolutely nothing to celebrate. That either their culture's not great, they've, kind of unethical behavior, they're making billions and billions of dollars, whatever it might be. And so I'm a big believer, when I work with clients, I talk about, okay, well, what do you have to achieve in order to celebrate? And a client not long ago, they cancelled the end of year celebration because they'd missed the target. And they'd done it in exactly the right way. Like culturally, they built the target in the right. They built the culture in the right way. They were shooting it for a particular target, and they talked to their employees. So in fact, it was the employees who said, if we don't achieve this particular target, then we won't have the end of year celebration. And they didn't miss it by much. This was the interesting thing. They didn't miss it by much, but they said, no, we have to be true to our word. And I spoke to one guy afterwards and I was like, oh, so what do you think? He's like, I love the fact that we stuck to our guns. He's like, previously, our previous culture, we'd have still done the end of year celebration and pretended that nothing was wrong. And we'd have all known that we actually missed the target that we had. He's like, so it feels good. He's like, don't get me wrong, I would love to have had the end of year celebration. But we didn't earn it. I love that. That's high performance right there. It's that recognition that, yeah, it's a reward. Now, it's not just a reward for targets. And often the end of year celebration becomes that. For me, it's it's about living the values in plain sight. It's about demonstrating behaviors. It's about collaborating in different ways that you haven't done before. And often what I'll do, and I did this year before last, actually, year before last. I get lost with the COVID years. I think it was the year before last. It was the first year where we were able to really have a decent-ish Christmas. And I did, I do lots of kind of evening speeches, particularly for celebrations, because people want something that's a bit funny, a bit energetic. And I got people at the tables to think about, what have they achieved this year as individuals? What have they achieved as a team? So this is something you can copy, right? What have they achieved as a team? And on a scale of 1 to 10, no, I think it was 1 to 5. On a scale of 1 to 5, do they feel, how do they feel? Do they feel that they've earned the end of year celebration? I think 0 was no, and 5 was absolutely hell yes. We should have done it before. So that's a good little, kind of exercise to undertake, particularly if you've got a team committed to the evolution of culture. But this time of year, December, particularly again, Northern Hemisphere, the nights get darker. You put the heating on. That's something I've got used to. When I first arrived here, I was absolutely freezing cold, and I put all the radiators on to maximum. And so by the second day, I was absolutely boiling hot and sweating because I've got my thermals on, and there's the kind of inside-outside thing. But it is, the nights are darker, the heating's on, it's colder outside, of course it is. And people are kind of looking forward to a break. People who are able to take some time off towards the end of December, they're looking forward to a break. I've talked about in the past about, if you're on the edge of burnout, then when you stop, you will get sick. So get ready for that. The best thing to do is to try and catch up on your sleep now. Don't overwork in the 2 weeks before, the 2-3 weeks before the end of the year's with you, and you're going to take a break. What you need to do is get on top of it now. Not be like, when I take a holiday, then I'll catch up. No, you'll get sick. You will, because your body is holding back so much, and it can only hold back so much for so long, and you will get sick. So you want to avoid that at all costs. But this time of year, I remember when I was an employee myself, we used to call it the silly season. People used to let their hair down, let their hair down. And my favourite, not, sound like Borat, my favourite, not, is when people used to say, I'm going to let it all hang out. Just the worst phrase. What does that mean? And for any kind of end of year celebration party, there's just a couple of things I really want you to think about. Now, if you're an employee, there's a fair few things that I want you to think about. Is don't overdrink, put yourself to bed at a reasonable hour. Don't force yourself upon another human being. Don't give anybody any unwanted attention. It's ridiculous that I'm having to say this, but some people need to be told. I'm hoping you're not one of them, but some people do. And if you're not one of them, in your head, you already know who that person is, right? Either in your team or in your workplace. There's always 1 or 2 people. They're just like, they just don't know how to behave. Now, partly I blame the organizations for this. That blame's a wrong word. I don't think organizations do enough to set expectations around these kind of end of year celebrations. And I know not every end of year celebration is a party, right? And I'll come back and talk about other celebrations shortly, but especially right now, I'm talking about any kind of party. The organization has to be crystal clear with its employees what they expect. Now, don't write a really long document. Don't refer people to the code of conduct. I mean, that's the worst thing that you can do. No, if you're in HR and you write code of conduct, I just want you to know now, nobody reads it. Like, nobody reads it because it's too complex, too difficult. So make it easy to understand. And, for me, it works best when people and culture brief people managers. And they should do that a month before the end of the year, if that's when those kind of celebrations take place. And they should brief managers on what's appropriate, what's not, because not everybody knows. Now, this is not some kind of don't party, I'm killing your joy podcast. It's not that at all. It's really, I used to, when they were done well, which I think I was fortunate as an employee when I read some of the horror stories and hear some of the horror stories from clients. I think I was fortunate is most of the end of year celebrations that I attended were pretty great. They were pretty great. Was people's behavior always great? No, it wasn't. It definitely wasn't. But something was always done about it afterwards. And I learned a lot from those. I really did. So I think if you're a manager, you really need to set expectation about behavior, what's appropriate and what's not. I think you need to remind people that this is a celebration of values. It's a celebration of individual and collective team achievement. It's not a reward. I think that's a mistake a lot of managers and a lot of teams make. This is your reward. Because if it was actually a reward, actually what people would prefer more is to be listened to be heard, is for their emails to be responded to, for their calls to be returned. People would prefer that much more than some kind of party at the end of the year. It's not a reward. It's an opportunity for you as a team to celebrate either your commitment to the values or the success that you've achieved. However, expectations do need to be set around the behavior. Not only that, the organization really needs to draw a line between where its responsibility starts and ends. And it ends as soon as people leave a meal. If there's a meal, and I always recommend, and I get asked a lot by clients, is, okay, well, we want to do a party. What do you recommend? There's like, food is good. Do food. If nothing else, it lines the stomach. I think too many organizations make celebrations about alcohol. I was doing that we were doing that in the mid to late 80s. Our celebrations were about alcohol. I worked for a bank at the time. I was 17. I remember going to these pretty grand, who knew a bank would have enough money for a celebration? Who knew? We've made another $1 billion on top of the $5 billion that we made last year. Let's spend $10,000 on you, the employees. They were always pretty grand affairs, and we would get dressed up, and you didn't really know were when I think back now, the employer's responsibility started and ended. But I always think food is good because if nothing else, it lines the stomach. Also, from an organizational perspective, what you don't want to do is fund alcohol. Again, it sounds like I'm being a bit of a killjoy. I'm really not. It's like, we'll buy loads of wine for the table. Listen, there's usually on a team of 20 people, 3 people will dominate that wine, and what they'll end up doing, definitely seen this many times, is they'll drink all the red, they'll drink all the whites, then they'll mix the two, they'll call it rosé because they think it's funny, and it's not, because rosé is a different wine completely. They'll think it's funny, and what they'll do is get absolutely hammered, and they're still on the company time. And at that point, the manager's got a responsibility to say something if they haven't already. And so I always think that alcohol should be purchased by the individual, because then there's less of it. And unfortunately, alcohol is, apart from being one of the most addictive drugs, as we all know, and the cause of many social problems, it can also cause untold organizational problems too. So again, I want to make the point that while celebration is important, the point that I'm making here is it's crucially important to bring people together. Just don't make it about booze. Also, you alienate people. It's that classic thing is, oh, we're going for Friday drinks. Well, what does that mean? If I don't drink, does that mean that I don't get invited? So I just just need to think a little bit more. Like I say, I think it's for me it's about a celebration of values. Now the example I mentioned this at the top of the show. I have a very good example. Something that happened to me is I set expectations for one of my teams. I was working in government, and the team had done really, really well, like really well. I was super proud of them. We had a number of targets that we had to meet, and we were easily on course to meet them. I think back now with a real sense of pride. And we had a little party booked upstairs at a venue, just not so far from where we were working. And I laid out to the entire team in what we would now call a town hall. This is, I don't know, 15 years ago, 16 years ago. We would now call it a town hall. But I laid out in very clear and simple terms just how proud I was of everybody, and the fact that we were going to have an end-of-year celebration. I didn't mention alcohol, end-of-year celebration. I think I talked about the dress code, but then I outlined the behaviors that I expected of every individual, and it was about being respectful. I didn't use the word humans. I think I said teammates. I wouldn't have used the word humans back then. It was about being respectful towards your teammates. It's not saying anything or doing anything that would make other people feel uncomfortable. I distinctly remember having this conversation. And I remember having the conversation because, unfortunately, one of the team drank way too much and then made some inappropriate comments. Thankfully, they were only comments. Well, not thankfully, that sounds terrible. That was bad enough, to be perfectly honest with you. And the person on the receiving end of them kind of laughed it off, but told me anyway. And then I had to deal with it. And because I'd set expectation about behaviour, I was able to give this individual a formal warning. And they were mortified by their behaviour. But of course, they'd drunk way too much and didn't remember it, which made it even worse. So when we whatever kind of celebration that you're going to have, and celebration is important. It's important for so many reasons, not least that it's a bit of a break from the norm, to be perfectly honest with you. It instills confidence in people. One of the biggest things is it brings people together. There's a real sense of unity. So when you make the celebration around values, when you make the celebration around behavior, when you make the celebration about team achievement, you create this real strong sense of unity. Not only that, that unity then leads into optimism about what's possible, and then people take motivation from that. And all of these things are hugely, hugely important. Excuse me a sec, just take a drink. All these things are hugely important for not only for your culture, but to create the foundations moving forward. I've worked with a number of sports teams myself, and quite often what they do is have this hectic schedule over Christmas. And what you need to do is set the expectation so that people understand that it's going to be a hectic schedule, understand that there will be a break for Christmas, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere. These are teams that I was working with. But actually, that will be based on performance. And if we don't perform and we're not where we want to be, then we're not going to stop and celebrate that. But what we are going to do is we're going to reflect. We're going to reflect on where we are. We're going to reflect on what we've learned. We're going to reflect on what we need to do different culturally in order to be able to achieve those targets. And that really creates a sense of unity. It's a fantastic opportunity to do so. And every organization should have those celebrations planned in. And they can be as simple as, I don't know, behavior of the month. I'm trying to think of some things I've done really recently. Have a board. I think one client, we had a Ways We're Smashing It board, which is a celebration of individuals. Standing agenda item. To kind of give kudos to people who have done good work or behaved in a way that we want to see, which is always good. So there's lots of things that you can do. Thank you cards for me are a big one. A thank you card is a recognition of good work. It's a way of celebrating success with the individual. And of course, what happens when you when you do that, for those of you who are interested in the brain science, is when humans receive praise, it releases a chemical called dopamine in the brain, and dopamine helps us to feel satisfaction, motivation, pleasure, all of these kind of things, and can reduce the likelihood of anxiety and stress. It doesn't eradicate it, but it can reduce the likelihood of it. Now, for all of the senior leaders that I'm working with at the minute, I'll have finished all my calls next week and talking to them about, well, how do you wrap up the end of this year? How do you celebrate through your words and your actions? And it is to talk about what we've learned. It's to talk about what we've achieved. It's to talk about the opportunity that we've got. It's to talk about how we're going to refresh the foundations. Almost every team that I'm working with is undertaking some form of culture refresh workshop at the beginning of the year. Of course they are. That's why they've got good cultures. They're not just talking about it. They're not saying, we can't take people off site or whatever it is that the excuses that you hear. They recognize that you've got to bring the curtain down on 1 year, give people the opportunity to stop, rest, relax if they're in that position to be able to do so. And then when they come back, bring people back together, reunite them, and then really set the tone for what you expect for the rest of the year. Our brains are interesting as well. I talked about the brain. Often the brain, it's not perfect, right? It tends to remember what it wants to remember. And so you've got these people who hark back to the old days. Oh, the parties that we used to have were brilliant. They were this, that, and the other. You can't do anything these days. It's just like the world has changed. Anybody who says you can't do anything these days, they need to educate themselves about the way that the world has changed. We want to make sure that everyone's focused on the future, but we want to make sure that, the things that the brain does remember are the memories of when we were able to bring good human beings together to celebrate collective achievement that creates the foundation for future success. So, wrapping up this podcast, I talk about this for a while. What we collectively, what I want you to do, if you're a member of a team listening to this podcast and your team is having any kind of either end of year celebration or any kind of celebration at all, I want you to be a good human. I want you to be respectful. If alcohol's involved, I want you to moderate it. I want you to think about the kind of needs and wants of the other individuals in the team. You don't want to ruin your own or other people's break over the new year. Again, I'm a big believer in celebrating, but I'm a big believer in doing it in the right way. And I think when you do it in the right way, not only do you get a sense of satisfaction and this sense that I've earned this break, but you also get that really warm feeling that actually together we did it in the right way. And we had what I would call a gentle celebration of our collective endeavor, how we lived our values, that creates the foundation for success in the next year and beyond. Okay. So this is the last podcast for 2023. I'm going to take a break myself. I'm not very good at taking breaks. I have to be perfectly honest with you. A little bit vulnerable here on my own podcast. I don't want you to get the sense when you listen to these that, he's got everything nailed. Just no way. My mind is a constant tornado of just stuff and ideas and client stuff that, where I really want to help people. And I've got a little bit of a different plan this year of how I'm going to relax. I'm going to be spending Christmas in the northwest of England in the Lake District, which is a place I have really fond memories of. I'm going to be inflicting my Christmas on my kids and ruining their Christmas, yank them out of the summer in Australia for no doubt the driving rain of the Lake District. But yeah, I'm going to take some time to reflect myself. I'm going to I'm going to, there've been some really great things that have happened this year. I'm going to celebrate those, and also going to kind of think about what I want to do differently next year. I want to say a huge thank you to you, not just for listening to this podcast, which has gone on for far longer than it normally does, not only listening to this podcast, but also for your commitment, for your feedback, for your ideas. For those of you engaged in any podcast, any blog, I am truly, truly grateful. When I started my business, what would it be now, 8 years ago, I never imagined this. I had some very short-term goals. The first one was, kind of survival, because I gambled the family's future on this. So to be in this position now is testament to the people who've shown faith in the work that I do. And I will continue into the next year to do different things, to find different ways to bring value to you in everything that you do. So if you celebrate Christmas, if you celebrate the holiday season, I want to wish you all the very, very best, to you and your families. If you don't, then, keep the faith over this period. If you make resolutions, it's an opportunity to reflect. All I would say is make the resolution now, so that it means something and that you don't pin it to a date. If you want to change, you can change absolutely anything that you want at any time. You've just got to have the commitment, the willpower, and it's good if you've got an accountability partner to help you to do that. Right, enough. That's me for 2023. Enjoy yourselves. Speak soon. Ta-ra for now. Thanks for listening to today's podcast. If you'd like to find out more about how I can help you transform the culture of your team, head to my website at www.colindellis.com.